Whenever I see one of these videos, it's an instant click for me. Anytime I see a quarterly review, a stats video, like, oh, what I've been reading and the numbers, I always want to watch it. I love the flow charts, I love the wheels, I like seeing people's numbers go up or them reach their goals or like take it easy on themselves when they don't reach their goals. I enjoy the experience as a viewer. Anytime I sit down to try and do one of these videos, I realize really quickly it's math and I don't care for it. I also really want to do this video because I'm pretty much going from 0 to 10 here. I took about a year, maybe 2 years off of BookTube, and in that time I really wasn't reading much of anything. I was enjoying Japan, I was doing my own thing, I was going through a lot of stuff like personally, so just I wasn't reading and that was fine, totally fine. However, at the beginning of this year, I started reading again. So I really wanted to use this fresh start to see what I can accomplish and kind of just how I'm doing. So yeah, that's why you're getting this video. I'm thinking I'm going to make it a regular thing or a quarterly thing. I kind of want to feel it out first. So bear with me. I gave myself a headache trying to figure out how to not look like an idiot in this video. And that's not going to be possible. There are 12 months in a year. A quarter of those 12 months would be 3 months. And I definitely included April in my stats video. So, this is my 3.3333333333 stats video. I'm acknowledging it now because there's literally nothing I can do about it. I use April books as my favorites. There's nothing to be done. So just enjoy it for what it is and take the disclaimer that's coming next as fact. Also, I did math and that's not my strong suit. So if you see any irregularities, mistakes, flat out lies, go ahead and just ignore them. It's fine. This is for fun. I don't have like really strong goals that I'll be trying to accomplish where I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta get those hard numbers up. That's just not what my content is. So yeah, if you see mistakes or, you know, bad math, I tried my darndest, okay? So my quarterly wrap up. I'm just going to dive into the numbers because that's all this is. If this is not the content you like, I will definitely just recommend you anything under the sun that's not math related, which could be anything else on my channel. I hope I got a pie chart here. It'd be so nice if I found a pie chart. It would be an incentive for me to do this again if I can find a good pie chart. Where was I? Oh yeah, numbers. Okay, so in the first quarter, the number of books I read in this first quarter is 31. I read 17 adult books and 14 YA books. That's almost a 50-50 split. Don't worry, actual math is a 55-45 split. Reading more adult as the majority, but I'm still reading quite a bit of YA. I definitely do think I lean more towards adult books nowadays. I guess the numbers added up to be a little bit different than that. So I was a little surprised at this number, but that's that. For different genres, I tried to map this out. The reason why these numbers might look different is because some books I would put in several different genres, and I really wanted to make sure that this was an accurate statement of what I've been into lately. I didn't want to put a book entirely in fantasy if it was also like sci-fi fantasy or had mystery elements. Looking at you, Gideon the Ninth, did not know what to do with Gideon the Ninth, which is why hopefully you get a nice pie chart, or you see the numbers of general fiction being 4 books, fantasy being 14, sci-fi being 15, horror being 6. For nonfiction, I read 1 nonfiction memoir, 8 magical realism, and 7 thriller suspense. I would also like to point out that horror, thriller, and suspense are not my norm, but I've been really gravitating towards them lately, and I hope that continues and that number goes up. And my page count is 9,463. At first, I thought this was kind of a small page number count. Just in hearing the number, I don't know, it just like, it didn't sparkle for me. But then I looked back at my best reading year I've ever had as far as Goodreads knows, and it was 2019 and I read a total of 30,000 pages, with the largest number being Game of Thrones. So, I mean, I feel like I'm actually kind of on track for a really good reading year, and I'm just gonna keep my same momentum up and not put a lot of pressure on it. For standalones and series, I read 15 standalones, started 2 series, and finished 4 series, and I DNF'd 3 series. So 3 books that I started were the beginning of a series or the continuation of a series, and I have no intention of completing that series. I will have actually an entire video dedicated to my current series TBR, my goals, my new restrictions that I'll be putting on myself, and kind of like just a whole video detailing a series that I'm currently in the middle of. If you're watching this within the first week that it's posted, that video is not out yet, but as soon as it is out, I'll go ahead and link that up there for you so you can go ahead and watch that if you're interested. Back to numbers. For stars, I read 12 5-star books. That's 38 78.7% of my reading was 5 stars, which sounds great to me. 5-star books are not something I always give out. It's more of like a really good book with the addition of like very sparkly special feelings. So I was happy with that number. 9 4-stars, which was 29% of my books. 7 3-star books, 22.5% of my reading. And then I gave out 3 2-star books, and that was 9.6% of my reading experience in the first quarter, which is really not bad. I'm happy with these numbers. I mean, you know, 2 stars, as much as I didn't enjoy reading the book, it does add some spice to my ratings. For the sake of flair, I'm glad I stepped out of my comfort zone. The longest book I've read so far this year is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab, and the shortest book I've read this year is A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow. Coincidentally, I didn't enjoy either of my reading experiences with either of these books, so there's something to be said for that sweet in-between of page counts. I'm just gonna check here to see if there's any other stats, because these are stats that I did the math on myself, but Goodreads has quite a few different interesting things, so I'll see if any of these interest me. That's a lot of little random dots. How do I read this? Is there no other way? Like, okay, so that's all the numbers, and I'm glad I got that out of the way. I feel like I got it out of the way rather quickly for how long it took me to do the numbers. Because this will be in future stats videos, if I intend to continue, I want to go ahead and highlight the series I finished this quarter. So I finished the Villains duology with Vicious and Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. The entire Wayward Children series I started and finished in this quarter, which I'm really happy with. Grey Warren was the last book in the Dreamer trilogy by Maggie Stiefvater, which I finished. And then Gleanings, I'm counting as finishing a series, even though it's an addition to the Scythe series, but I really just wanted to count it, so I did, because this is my stats video, and I can give myself numbers if I want to. Welcome to Jade's video, where she's an unreliable narrator all the time. Sorry, I grabbed some tea in between because I was so happy that I finished all my math stuff that I rewarded myself with a matcha latte. Where was I? Yeah, okay. I also want to talk about new favorites that I found this quarter. For new favorites, I have Gideon the Ninth, Legends and Lattes, God Killer, Nettle and Bone, and Babel. These are all 5 stars for me. They blew me away. They stuck with me. I loved them. If I haven't featured them in videos, I'll talk about them now. So Gideon the Ninth is a recent read for me, actually my most recent read to date. I just finished Gideon the Ninth, and I was obsessed from the first chapter, which I do have highlighted in my first chapter tag. I read the first chapter of Gideon the Ninth and was sold immediately. Just like, it spoke to my soul. Gideon the Ninth is a sci-fi fantasy. It is labeled as a sci-fi, but I would say it leans way heavier into fantasy than people realize. A lot of people describe it as like a lesbian space opera, and I would say that that's both accurate and missing a really big portion of what this book is at the same time. It's high in necromancer lore and like magic. It really throws you in as far as the storyline, the world building, which is really intricate and a little hard to handle at first, but Gideon's narration throughout the entire book as a main character makes everything enjoyable even if you don't know what's happening to you. It was a promise book from my TBR, meaning it was a book that was recommended to me and I promised to read it. Keep recommending those books because I'm really enjoying my reading experience so far, and I don't know when I would have picked up Gideon the Ninth otherwise, but I'm so happy I did. The next is Legends and Lattes. I freaking loved Legends and Lattes. Hold on. This is my friend's copy that I will be returning to her soon, maybe. I think I also gifted it to her, which makes this doubly awful, but like, I have to get my own copy of this and I need to like tab it and just enjoy it for a second round because it was so much fun reading this book. I have a vlog where I only read Legends and Lattes in coffee shops, and it was one of the best reading experiences I think I've ever had. I definitely want to continue doing videos like that in the future, but I don't want to force them, so I really want it to happen naturally or like lend to the theme of the book or the video. So I'll be looking out for more books that would be fun to read, but yeah, Legends and Lattes was fantastic. It was a really great reading experience, and I'm so happy that I had it. Then we have God Killer. This is by Hannah Kaner, and I really cannot believe that this was a debut novel. Hannah Kaner managed to make me incredibly invested in characters, a world, a plot, a story in a really small amount of pages. These are gorgeous pages, by the way. This is the Illumicrate edition, but it's such a short book, and it felt like I was fully immersed the entire time I was reading it. This has a woman named Kissin who is a god killer. She hunts down gods and destroys them after a big mortal and god war in which the gods were eliminated or cast aside. There are still minor gods in this world, but they're in hiding, and Kissin susses them out and destroys them. There were so many interesting aspects to this book, and I was just so impressed by how connected I was to every part of it that this is definitely one of my favorite books of the year and definitely one of my favorite books of all time now. I'm really looking forward to when I get to pick up the second book. I know it's going to be a while, so I'm just trying to kind of temper down my excitement, but I have a lot of excitement towards this book. If you haven't picked this up yet and you're a little worried because it's a debut, you will be pleasantly surprised, as I was. Then we have Nettle and Bone. This was my introduction to T. King Fisher's work, and it was absolutely phenomenal. I gave this 4.5 stars, and I cannot get it out of my head. In retrospect, for me, it's now a 5. This just pinpricked just the right nerve as far as grim fairy tales, dark fantasy, while also being incredibly funny, witty, and lighthearted at times. I almost want to call this a cozy fantasy, but having read this, I really think that these are in two different genres, so I'm going to be careful with the word cozy, but it does warm your heart, and I really enjoyed it. There are heavy topics in this, such as miscarriage and forced marriage, so definitely look into the content warnings. In the story, you have a girl named Mara, and she is going to go save her sister, who had to marry a king from a kingdom who seems incredibly sus and awful. So she goes on a mission to go complete these impossible tasks in order to save her sister. However, the impossible tasks happen at the beginning of the book. The story really is about the journey back and the friends she makes along the way. I just thought it was incredibly funny, really witty and clever, and I just had such a good time that it had to be one of my favorites. And T. King Fisher has really risen to the top in my mind as a new favorite author, so I will be reading more of their work as it comes out. My last book I will have physically, actually really soon, but right now I don't have it physically, and that mortally wounds me, but Babel, of course, is going to make the list for favorites of this quarter because it is absolutely phenomenal. I talked about Babel in my first wrap-up, which I will link up above in more detail, but if you really don't know anything about Babel, I will just say go in knowing that the beginning is slow and that it builds up to like a heart attack. So like I cannot stress this enough. It's a really just beautifully written book. I would have probably given this a 5-star on the merit of its writing alone, but I also really connected to the characters. The message is really powerful. R.F. Kuang knows what she's doing when she's trying to get her point across, and it was just like heart-shudderingly good the entire time. Babel is for sure a new favorite, and I cannot wait to get the physical copy because I need to hold this story in my hands. Ooh, I don't want to talk about this part. Okay, so let's talk about most disappointing books of the quarter. For most disappointing, these were my books with the highest expectations. So these are not necessarily bad books. This could be that I placed an expectation upon the book it didn't meet. So these are not bad books, they're disappointing books for me personally. So some of my favorite authors are on this list, which is why they're in most disappointing, because I was truly had just high bar expectations for these authors, and it didn't hit. So for most disappointing, I have Gleanings, which is 3.5 in the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman. I have the Scythe series behind me, but I'm not going to hold them up because I don't want to associate my review of the Scythe series with Gleanings, which is a bunch of short stories that just take place in the Scythe universe, and I think are only really meant for those hardcore fans that really just wanted extra little tidbits from this world, which was me. However, I either had really high highs or really low lows with these stories. Some of them hit and were so funny and good and fantastic or thought compelling, and I felt like, yeah, I was back in the Scythe universe, and it reminded me of all the things I loved about this series to begin with, having to deal with AI and a world that has pretty much systemized death so that they have conquered death and now have a system in place. So you have scythes, which are people who then decide who lives and who dies in order to keep the population growth manageable. I think that this is a really good series to read now as AI becomes more and more prevalent in our day-to-day lives, because the Thunderhead is a really interesting AI character. It just added extra flair to this sci-fi world, and I just love the series. Gleanings wasn't that good. Some of them were really good, some of them were really bad. It ended up being a 3 for me, but I wanted this to be a 5 because I was an easy target. This should have just thrilled me, and I was instead happy sometimes and cringing other times. So it was a disappointing read. Not the worst book I've read this year by any means, but definitely just not great. My next disappointment was Grey Warren, which was the final book in the Dreamer trilogy by Maggie Stiefvater, and I just really wanted to love this trilogy. Even when really epic things were happening, I felt like my characters that I knew and loved were not fully there, or they had changed in some fundamental way that I had missed. So that was was really difficult for me, and it just didn't stand up to the Raven Cycle series by Maggie Stiefvater. This was a spin-off series, but it was following my favorite character. Everything was going for this series, and it just didn't deliver on the depth I wanted it to. I gave it a 4-star, but when thinking back on the series as a whole, it really just kind of was a letdown. I have to put it as a disappointment. Despite it not being bad, it was disappointing because I had just the highest bar humanly possible. Maggie Stiefvater is my favorite author, so yeah. Let's move on. Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. I almost bought this duology because I wanted to have it physically on my shelves. After reading Vicious by V.E. Schwab, I was sold. That was a 5-star book, and I went right into Vengeful. There was no pause, there was no breath. I went Vicious, Vengeful, and I could not have been more startled at my results. I gave Vengeful a 2-star. I could not stand this book based off of my comparison of the other book. I just felt like it lost its message, it lost its meaning. I felt like our main characters were kind of like all over the place. I didn't know their motivations, what they wanted, what they needed, or like where they were going. I felt like they didn't know either, and like it just, things didn't hit. I didn't care, and we just kept on getting more and more new characters that I didn't care about until I was so overwhelmed that I almost DNF'd the book at the end. And then I like got to the end and it was just fine. It was a letdown for me, and it's not a letdown for a lot of people. I think this might even be an unpopular opinion. Yeah, I just looked up Vengeful on Goodreads. It has a 4.1 rating with around 79,000 ratings. I am definitely in the minority here. I don't think that you should not pick up the duology, but I was personally offended and affronted by this book because book 1 was such a 5-star, and I really thought it was going in one direction, and it did a U-turn swerve, just kept going right off the cliff. The worst book that I read this year also was a disappointment to me because I had high expectations for it that were completely unfounded because it was based on the cover, and that is my fault. And that was Sleeping Giants. Sleeping Giants I read with an audiobook. Look, if you got through Sleeping Giants physically without an audiobook, I think you're stellar. I think you are a top-notch, strong human being that I would like to be when I grow up. I was so freaking bored by this book. I love multimedia. I love sci-fi. I love robot sentience, alternate universe, like they're coming for us kind of books. I don't know what happened here. This book was boring, and I just didn't care. The characters were flat. There was a romance just shoved into the story in the most awkward way possible. I felt like I was not consenting to the romance that I was reading at all. And so I ended up trying to skip parts, and then it would become confusing, so I'd have to go back. I read this book in full. I don't know why, and it was actually physically painful. I gave it a 2-star instead of a 1 because the audio cast did everything they could to elevate these characters to actual breathing human beings, and not even them breathing in my ear could get me to believe that they were real. Whew, wow, I just really unleashed that. Let's move on to surprises. Surprise books for me were books that I had zero expectation of, or a lower expectation and it exceeded expectations. For that, I had obviously Gideon the Ninth because I went into this book knowing it was super polarized. I was either going to love it or hate it, and I kind of was afraid I was going to hate it. That didn't happen, not even at all. In fact, if I cared about my sexual orientation, this would have been an awakening for me. But instead, I just enjoyed myself. Next was Nothing to See Here. This was a book that was so darn freaking wholesome and cute and funny. Funny as heck. I read this book and just the synopsis did not make me think I was going to really like this book in a large way. This was one of my general fiction reads, and essentially it's following a girl who made a friend at boarding school. They have very different backgrounds. She comes from a working family, and her friend from boarding school is a very rich, affluent family. So they become unlikely friends, and then she gets a call one day that her friend is now a stepmother to 2 kids who spontaneously combust. They set fire. And this is done in a literal way, but the metaphor here for like how children react to situations and trauma and how adults view that trauma is just phenomenal. I thought it did an amazing job. It had a fantastic message and was just really funny, wholesome, cute, and sweet. I really enjoyed my time. Even though it has exploding children in it, I think I would almost recommend this to anyone, and definitely a surprise that I did not see coming. Finally, for my surprises, we have Bunny. Bunny was a book I knew was going to be weird. And so I went in thinking I was not going to be weirded out because I knew it was going to be weird, and I'm kind of weird. So I thought we might vibe, or I might just like realize that it was kind of an overblown book that kind of got popular because of its weirdness, like a hipster. I thought this was going to be a hipster book. I thought it was strange. It was fantastic, and I gave it 5 stars, but it was almost like at the behest of my time and my mental health. I was just like, yeah, I think I'm gonna give it 5 stars. I might have been gaslit. I don't know. What I read, I don't know what I read, but I know that I enjoyed myself, I think, and I was just, it was weird. What is Bunny about? Yeah, no, I really couldn't tell you. A girl goes to college and she sees these mean girls and she thinks that they're awful, and then starts to hang out with them and realizes that they're awful and maybe she's awful, and it just gets darker and weirder and has a lot of mental health messages laced through it. Also really surprised me about this book was the amount of depth that it secretly had. When people describe this book, they're trying not to spoil it for you, so know that there are hidden depths and meanings to this book that maybe aren't being thrown out on the internet because people want you to just go in with the open mind of finding out more about this character, and that's exactly what happened to me. I was surprised. Everything about that book was pretty surprising. Oh my god, I think I finished my stats video. Yes, okay, we're done. Stats over, math out. Okay, my next video I'm hoping to be my series TBR, my series goals, and all of those sorts of things, but for my next stats video, which I may or may not make, sorry, I'm an Aquarius, commitment is not my strong point. I just want to have a surplus of series finished versus series started, but just so we have a goal, something to look forward to next time, maybe. That's kind of the goal I'm working with, and I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know, do you like stats videos? I really enjoy them, but I never thought I would make one quite like this. You do not need to tell me whether you like mine or not, but if you did like it, you can go ahead and like this video, then I'll know. Whether you do or not, I hope you're enjoying the sun or more stars wherever you are, and until next time, bye!